I never thought I'd become the kind of man who checks his wife's phone at 3 in the morning, but there I was, standing in our kitchen with the device glowing in my hands like some cursed artifact. The house felt different that night. Colder. Emptier. Even with Jennifer sleeping upstairs in what used to be our bed. My name is Nathan Cross, and I used to think I knew everything about betrayal. I'd built and sold 3 tech companies by the age of 42, navigating corporate backstabbing and hostile takeovers with the precision of a surgeon. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for this moment. The text message thread was still open on Jennifer's phone, the one she'd forgotten to lock after stumbling home at midnight, reeking of expensive wine and lies. The conversation with someone named Evan made my stomach twist into knots that would have impressed a sailor. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow? The conference room on the 15th floor, just like we planned. Make sure Nathan doesn't show up unexpectedly again. That was too close. Don't worry about him. He's too busy playing with his computers to notice anything." I set the phone down carefully, my hands surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. 20 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to. Jennifer Cross, the woman I'd supported through business school, the one whose career I'd helped launch with my connections, was now discussing me like I was some inconvenient piece of furniture. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself. It was the casual dismissal, the way she spoke about me like I was already gone, already forgotten. Too busy playing with his computers. As if the work that had paid for this house, her designer clothes, and her executive lifestyle was just some hobby I'd picked up to pass the time. I walked to the window and stared out at our suburban neighborhood. Perfect lawns, perfect houses, perfect lies hidden behind perfect facades. The Hendersons next door had their porch light on, probably waiting for their teenage son to come home from another party. Normal problems, normal concerns. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, and I barely recognized the man looking back. When had I become so invisible in my own life? When had I started accepting the late nights, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the way Jennifer's eyes would glaze over whenever I tried to talk about anything that mattered? The answer hit me like a slap. Gradually, then all at once. I'd been so focused on building our financial future that I'd missed the present crumbling around me. While I was debugging code and managing server migrations for my consulting clients, my wife was debugging our marriage and migrating to someone else's bed. Evan. The name rolled around in my mind like a marble in a tin can. I knew that name from Jennifer's work stories. Evan Martinez, her subordinate at Pinnacle Tech Solutions, the company where she'd climbed from marketing coordinator to vice president of strategic development. Young, ambitious, probably saw Jennifer as his ticket to the executive floor. Smart kid. Too bad he'd picked the wrong married woman to climb over. I went to my home office, the one room in the house that was still entirely mine, and fired up my laptop. If there's one advantage to being married to someone for 2 decades, it's that you know all their passwords. Jennifer had always been terrible with digital security, using variations of our anniversary date and her maiden name for everything. Within 20 minutes, I had access to her email, her calendar, and her cloud storage. The affair wasn't just some recent fling. It had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of hotel receipts, romantic dinners charged to the company credit card, and weekend business conferences that looked suspiciously like romantic getaways. But it was the email thread with her best friend Vanessa that really opened my eyes. "Nathan's getting suspicious," Jennifer had written 3 weeks ago. He asked about the Phoenix trip. Vanessa's response made my jaw clench. "Just stick to the plan. Once the promotion comes through and you're running the West Coast division, you can file for divorce and take half of everything. His consulting business is doing well. You'll be set for life." "What about Evan?" "What about him? He's useful now, but you don't seriously think you're going to marry your subordinate, do you? This is about securing your future, not playing house with some boy toy." I leaned back in my chair, processing what I'd just read. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated strategy. Jennifer wasn't leaving me for love. She was positioning herself for the most advantageous divorce possible. The affair with Evan was just a means to an end, a way to create emotional distance while she maneuvered her career into the perfect position to leave me behind. The funny thing was, I almost admired the ruthlessness of it. Almost. I spent the rest of the night going through everything: bank statements, credit card records, phone logs. Jennifer had been sloppy, probably because she'd underestimated me so completely. She'd left a trail of evidence that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. By sunrise, I had a complete picture of my wife's double life. More importantly, I had a plan. If Jennifer wanted to play chess, I was about to show her what it felt like to face a grandmaster. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The next morning, I made coffee for 2, just like I had every morning for the past 20 years. Jennifer came downstairs at exactly 7:15, already dressed in her power suit, checking her phone with the kind of focus she used to reserve for me. "Morning," she said without looking up. "I'll be late tonight. Board meeting." "Of course," I replied, handing her the coffee mug. "Evan going to be there?" She froze for just a fraction of a second, so brief that anyone else would have missed it, but I'd been watching for it. "Evan's in my department, Nathan. He goes to all the department meetings." "Right. Just making conversation." She kissed my cheek with the mechanical precision of a factory robot and headed for the garage. I watched from the kitchen window as she backed out of the driveway, probably already texting her lover before she reached the street. I waited 30 minutes, then got dressed and drove to Pinnacle Tech Solutions. The building was one of those glass and steel monuments to corporate ambition that had sprouted across the city like expensive weeds. I'd been there dozens of times for company parties and Jennifer's office celebrations, so the security guard recognized me. "Morning, Mr. Cross," said Manny, the day shift supervisor. "Mrs. Cross expecting you." "Thought I'd surprise her with lunch," I said, holding up a bag from her favorite restaurant. "Is she in meetings all morning?" Manny glanced at his computer screen. "Looks like she's got a busy day. Conference room meetings until noon, then that new strategic planning session on 15. "The one with Evan Martinez?" "Yeah, that's the one. Those two have been burning the midnight oil on some big project. Very hush-hush." "I'll bet they have." "I'll just wait in the lobby," I said. "Don't want to interrupt anything important." I found a seat with a clear view of the elevator bank and settled in to watch. Corporate buildings are like ant farms. If you sit still long enough, you can map out all the patterns, all the relationships, all the little dramas playing out behind the professional facades. At 10:30, Jennifer and Evan stepped out of the elevator together. Even from across the lobby, their body language told the whole story. The way he leaned in when she talked, the way she touched his arm while laughing at something he said, the way they stood just a little too close for colleagues. They were good. I had to give them credit. To a casual observer, they looked like two professionals discussing business. But I wasn't a casual observer anymore. I was a man with nothing left to lose and a very good memory for details. I followed them to the coffee shop across the street, staying far enough back to avoid detection. They sat at a corner table, and I found a spot behind a pillar where I could watch without being seen. Evan was younger than I'd expected, probably 35, with the kind of effortless good looks that came from good genes and expensive grooming. He wore his confidence like a tailored suit, leaning back in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who thought he'd already won. Jennifer was animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her eyes sparkled when she looked at him, and she laughed at his jokes with genuine delight. It was like watching my wife transform into someone I'd never met. "The Phoenix presentation went perfectly," she was saying. Callahan was impressed with the market analysis. "Your market analysis," Evan replied. "I just provided the pretty charts." "Don't be modest. We make a good team. The best." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She didn't pull away. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos. Not for evidence. I already had plenty of that. This was for motivation. Every time I started to feel guilty about what I was planning, I'd look at these pictures and remember how it felt to watch my wife fall in love with someone else. They finished their coffee and walked back to the building, still deep in conversation. I gave them a 5-minute head start, then followed. "Back so soon?" Manny asked as I approached the security desk. "Forgot something in the car," I said. "Say, Manny, you've been working here a long time. You must see everything that goes on." He shrugged. "I mind my own business." "Smart policy. But you know how it is? Sometimes you can't help but notice things. Like when people are working late together, or coming in early for special projects." Manny's expression shifted slightly. He glanced around the lobby, then leaned forward. "You asking about your wife and that Martinez kid?" "Should I be?" "Look, Mr. Cross, I like you. You've always been decent to me, not like some of the executives who act like I'm invisible. But what goes on upstairs? That's not my department. I understand. But if you were in my position, what would you want to know?" He was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he sighed. "They've been staying late a lot. Real late. And sometimes they leave together, even when their cars are parked on opposite sides of the garage." "How often?" 2, 3 times a week for the past few months, and last Friday I saw them in the parking garage after hours. They weren't discussing business, if you know what I mean." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Thanks, Manny. I appreciate your honesty." "Mr. Cross, whatever you're thinking of doing, be careful. That Martinez kid has connections upstairs, and your wife, well, she's got friends in HR. Noted. I left the building and sat in my car for a few minutes, processing what I'd learned. The affair was common knowledge among the support staff, which meant it was probably common knowledge throughout the company. Everyone knew except the husband. How perfectly humiliating. I drove to my next stop, the boxing gym where I'd been working out for the past 5 years. It wasn't much to look at. A converted warehouse in an industrial part of town, filled with heavy bags, speed bags, and the kind of equipment that had seen better decades. But it was real in a way that nothing else in my life seemed to be anymore. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," said Dino Castellano, the gym's owner and my closest friend. Dino was a former middleweight who'd never quite made it to the big time, but he understood the mechanics of fighting better than anyone I'd ever met. "Something like that," I said, wrapping my hands. "Got time to talk?" "Always got time for you, Nate. What's eating you?" I told him everything. The affair, the emails, the plan to divorce me after securing her promotion. Dino listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you going to do?" he finally asked. "I'm going to make them regret ever thinking I was stupid enough to ignore what was happening." "Revenge, huh? That's a dangerous game." "So is marriage, apparently." Dino laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want my advice? Don't get mad. Get even. But be smart about it. These corporate types, they think they're untouchable. Show them they're wrong. Any suggestions? Yeah, hit them where it hurts most. Their reputations, people like that, their image is everything. Destroy that, and you destroy them." I spent the next hour working the heavy bag, each punch landing with the satisfying thud of a plan coming together. By the time I left the gym, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Jennifer wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd been playing games a lot longer than she had, and I'd never lost one that mattered. The war was about to begin. I started small. That's the key to any successful campaign. Establish your position, test your opponent's defenses, then escalate systematically. Jennifer had made the mistake of underestimating me, and I intended to use that advantage for as long as possible. My first target was Evan's car. I knew his schedule now. He left the Pinnacle building every day at exactly 6:15, always parked in the same spot in the executive section of the garage. A creature of habit, which made him predictable. Predictable made him vulnerable. I waited in the shadows near the stairwell, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. When he walked past, talking loudly on his phone about quarterly projections, I followed at a distance. "No, I think we can push the timeline up," he was saying. "Jennifer and I have been working on some innovative approaches to the market penetration strategy." "I'll bet you have." He reached his car, a silver BMW that probably cost more than most people made in a year, and fumbled with his keys while continuing his conversation. I waited until he drove away, then approached the vehicle. I didn't key it or slash the tires. That would have been too obvious, too crude. Instead, I did something much more subtle and infinitely more frustrating. I loosened the valve stems on all 4 tires, not enough to cause a flat immediately, but enough to ensure a slow, steady leak. By morning, his car would be sitting on 4 nearly flat tires. Not dangerous, just inconvenient and embarrassing. Then I placed a small magnetic GPS tracker under the rear bumper. If I was going to wage this war effectively, I needed intelligence on enemy movements. The next morning, I positioned myself at a coffee shop across from Pinnacle's parking garage and waited. At 8:45, I saw Evan's BMW limping into the garage, riding low on 4 soft tires. Through my binoculars, I could see him gesturing angrily on his phone. Phase 1? Complete. But that was just the opening move. The real game was about to begin. I'd spent the previous evening diving deeper into Jennifer's digital life, and what I'd found was even more damaging than I'd initially thought. She'd been using company resources for personal business, charging romantic dinners to her corporate credit card, and using her company phone for intimate conversations with Evan. More importantly, I'd discovered that her upcoming promotion wasn't as certain as she'd led Evan to believe. There were 3 candidates for the West Coast Division head position, and Jennifer was actually trailing in 3rd place, according to the internal emails I'd intercepted. She'd been lying to her lover about her career prospects, probably to keep him interested. That gave me leverage. I created a new email account using a generic name and sent an anonymous message to Pinnacle's HR department. "I'm writing to report a potential violation of company policy regarding the inappropriate use of corporate resources. I have reason to believe that VP Jennifer Cross has been using company credit cards for personal expenses and conducting a romantic relationship with a direct subordinate. creating a potential harassment situation. I thought the company should be aware of this situation before it becomes a larger problem. I didn't include any evidence. Not yet. This was just a warning shot, designed to put HR on alert and create a paper trail. When the real evidence surfaced later, they'd remember this email and realize the situation had been brewing for a while. The beauty of corporate bureaucracy is that once HR gets involved, everything becomes documented, investigated, and scrutinized. Jennifer's carefully constructed professional image was about to face its first real test. Next, I turned my attention to Evan's social media presence. The kid was active on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, constantly posting about his professional achievements and lifestyle. He had the kind of online presence that screamed, "Look at me," to anyone who'd listen. I created several fake accounts and began a subtle campaign of professional undermining. Nothing obvious or traceable, just a series of comments and questions designed to make him look less competent than he pretended to be. When he posted about leading a major strategic initiative, I commented from a fake account. Interesting approach. Have you considered the potential regulatory implications of that strategy? Seems like it might create compliance issues. When he shared an article about market trends, I questioned his interpretation of the data with just enough technical knowledge to make him look shallow in comparison. It was psychological warfare at its finest, destruction by 1,000 small cuts to his professional reputation. But the real masterstroke came when I discovered something interesting in Jennifer's calendar. She had a client dinner scheduled for Friday night at Chez Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in the city. The reservation was for 2 people, and it definitely wasn't with a client. I called the restaurant and, using my most authoritative voice, identified myself as Jennifer Cross's assistant. "I need to confirm the details of Ms. Cross's reservation for Friday evening," I said. "She's bringing an important client and wants to make sure everything is perfect." "Of course," the hostess replied. "Table for 2 at 8 o'clock, under the name Cross. Will there be any special dietary requirements for Ms. Cross and Mr. Martinez?" "Bingo." "Actually, there's been a change of plans," I continued. "Ms. Cross would like to move the reservation to the main dining room instead of the private alcove she originally requested. She wants to make sure they're visible to other diners. You know how important networking can be." "I'll make that change right away. Table 12 in the main dining room." "Perfect. And could you make sure the sommelier knows that Mr. Martinez prefers red wine? Ms. Cross wants to impress him." "Absolutely. We'll take good care of them." I hung up with a smile. Jennifer and Evan thought they were going to have a romantic dinner in a private corner of the restaurant. Instead, they'd be on full display in the main dining room, visible to anyone who happened to be there. Anyone like Jennifer's boss, Richard Callahan, who ate at Chez Laurent every Friday night with his wife. I knew this because Jennifer had mentioned it dozens of times over the years, always complaining about having to make small talk with the Callahans at various company functions. I made my own reservation for Friday night, a table with a perfect view of table 12. The week passed slowly, but I could see the effects of my campaign beginning to take hold. Jennifer seemed more stressed than usual, checking her phone constantly and having hushed conversations behind closed doors. Evan's social media presence became more defensive, his posts less confident. The anonymous HR complaint had obviously reached the right people because I noticed Jennifer staying later at the office and being more careful about her interactions with Evan in public spaces. They were feeling the pressure, even if they didn't know where it was coming from. Friday night arrived with the promise of rain. I dressed carefully, business casual, nothing too memorable, and arrived at Chez Laurent 15 minutes before my reservation. The hostess seated me at a corner table with a perfect view of the main dining room. At exactly 8 o'clock, Jennifer and Evan arrived. I watched as the hostess led them to table 12, right in the center of the dining room under the crystal chandelier. Jennifer looked confused. She'd obviously expected their usual private alcove, but Evan was already pulling out her chair with a flourish. They looked good together, I had to admit. Jennifer wore a black dress that I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago, and Evan was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my car payment. They looked like the kind of power couple that graced the covers of business magazines. Too bad their evening was about to be ruined. At 8:30, Richard and Margaret Callahan walked into the restaurant. Callahan was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. His wife was elegant in the way that only came from generations of old money and careful breeding. They were seated 3 tables away from Jennifer and Evan, with a clear line of sight to their romantic dinner. I watched as Jennifer noticed her boss, her face going pale under her carefully applied makeup. She said something to Evan, who turned to look at the Callahans with obvious panic in his eyes. The damage was done. There was no way to explain away a romantic dinner between a VP and her subordinate, especially not when they were holding hands across the table and gazing into each other's eyes like lovesick teenagers. I finished my meal slowly, savoring both the excellent food and the entertainment. Jennifer and Evan tried to maintain professional composure, but their body language screamed guilty conscience. They left before dessert, practically fleeing from the restaurant. I paid my check and walked out into the night rain, feeling satisfied for the first time in months. The first phase of my campaign was complete, and my enemies were starting to understand that they were in a fight. But this was just the beginning. I had so much more planned for them, and they had no idea what was coming next. The war was heating up, and I was just getting started. Monday morning brought the first real confirmation that my strategy was working. I was having breakfast at the diner near Pinnacle's building, a greasy spoon that catered to construction workers and security guards, the kind of place where corporate executives never set foot, when Manny slid into the booth across from me. "Thought you should know," he said quietly. "There's been some interesting activity upstairs." "Oh?" "HR lady came in early this morning. Vanessa Williams, the director. She went straight to your wife's office, closed the door, had what looked like a pretty serious conversation." I sipped my coffee, keeping my expression neutral. "Probably just business." "Maybe. But then she called that Martinez kid up to HR. He was up there for over an hour, came back looking like someone had run over his dog." This was better than I'd hoped. The anonymous complaint was being taken seriously, which meant Jennifer and Evan were now under official scrutiny. Corporate HR departments were like immune systems. Once they detected a potential threat, they went into full defensive mode. "Anything else?" "Your wife's been making a lot of phone calls, private ones, and she canceled her lunch meetings for the rest of the week." I slid a 20 across the table. "Thanks for keeping your eyes open. Just remember what I said about being careful. These people have long memories and short tempers." After Manny left, I sat in the diner for another hour, planning my next moves. The restaurant incident had clearly rattled them, but I needed to keep the pressure building. The key was to make them feel like they were under attack from all directions while keeping my own involvement invisible. I drove to the public library and used one of their computers to do some research on Pinnacle's corporate structure. What I found was fascinating. The company was in the middle of a major expansion, trying to secure a series of government contracts that would triple their revenue over the next 5 years. Those kinds of contracts required extensive background checks and moral character evaluations for all senior executives. A scandal involving a VP and her subordinate could jeopardize the entire deal. I made a note to myself to research the contracting agency's requirements. If I could find a way to bring their relationship to the attention of the right government officials, the consequences would be far more severe than anything HR could dish out. But first, I needed to deal with a more immediate problem. Jennifer had been suspicious of my behavior lately, asking questions about my schedule and checking up on my activities. I needed to give her something else to worry about. That afternoon, I drove to the office building where I rented a small suite for my consulting business. It was nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a reception area, but it gave me a professional address and a place to meet clients. More importantly, it gave me a base of operations that Jennifer knew nothing about. I spent the next few hours setting up what I privately called Operation Spotlight. Using my network of contacts in the tech industry, I began spreading carefully crafted rumors about Evan's professional competence. A casual mention to a former colleague about hearing some interesting things about the quality of work coming out of Pinnacle's strategic development team. A question to a vendor about whether they'd had any problems with that Martinez kid who thinks he knows more than he does. Nothing actionable, nothing traceable, just enough doubt to start people talking. In the tech world, reputation is everything. Once people start questioning your competence, it spreads like a virus through the professional network. Within a week, Evan would start noticing that his calls weren't being returned as quickly, his emails weren't getting responses, and his ideas weren't being taken as seriously. But the real genius of the plan was its indirect nature. The damage to Evan's reputation would reflect poorly on Jennifer, since she was his supervisor. If her subordinate was incompetent, what did that say about her judgment and leadership abilities? As I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I smiled and typed back, "No problem. I've got some projects to work on myself." That evening, instead of going home, I drove to the Marriott downtown, the hotel where Jennifer and Evan had been conducting their affair. I'd identified it from the credit card receipts, and the GPS tracker on Evan's car had confirmed multiple visits. I walked into the bar like I belonged there, ordered a scotch, and struck up a conversation with the bartender. His name was Tommy, and he'd been working there for 15 years. He had the kind of face that invited confidences and the kind of memory that retained details. "You know," I said after we'd chatted for a while, "I think I saw someone I know here last week. Attractive woman, blonde, probably in her late 30s. She was with a younger guy, dark hair, expensive suit." Tommy nodded immediately. "Oh yeah, I know who you mean. They've been coming in pretty regularly. Always get the same table in the corner, always order the same drinks. She gets white wine, he gets bourbon neat." "Really? How often?" "Maybe twice a week for the past few months. They're not exactly subtle about it, if you know what I mean. Definitely not business associates. Married. She is. Big diamond ring, but she always takes it off when she sits down. Puts it in her purse like she's embarrassed by it." That detail hit me harder than I'd expected. Jennifer removing her wedding ring, the symbol of our 20-year marriage, so she could play house with her lover. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. "You okay, buddy?" Tommy asked, noticing my expression. "Yeah, just reminded me of something unpleasant." "Hey, I see it all in this business. People think they're invisible when they're cheating, but they're not. There's always someone watching, always someone who remembers." I finished my drink and left a generous tip. "Thanks for the conversation, Tommy. You've been very helpful." "Anytime. And hey, whatever you're dealing with, I hope it works out." If only he knew. I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, past the perfect houses with their perfect lawns and their perfectly hidden secrets. Our house looked the same as always, colonial style, 2-car garage, manicured landscaping that cost more per month than most people spent on groceries. But it felt different now. It felt like a stage set, a carefully constructed facade hiding the rot underneath. Jennifer's car wasn't in the garage, which meant she was probably at the hotel with Evan right now, removing her wedding ring and pretending to be someone else. Someone single, someone available, someone who hadn't spent 20 years building a life with a man she now considered irrelevant. I went to my office and opened my laptop. The GPS tracker showed Evan's car parked at the Marriott, just as I'd expected. They were there right now, in some anonymous hotel room, making plans for a future that didn't include me. That was fine. I was making plans too, and mine were much more detailed than theirs. I spent the next hour researching Vanessa Williams, Pinnacle's HR director and Jennifer's best friend. What I found was interesting. She'd been with the company for 12 years, working her way up from assistant to director. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, the kind of person who followed company policy to the letter. More importantly, she was fiercely protective of Pinnacle's reputation. She'd handled several high-profile harassment cases over the years, always coming down hard on executives who violated company policy. If she was investigating Jennifer and Evan, it meant she was taking the situation seriously. I made a note to find a way to provide her with more concrete evidence. Anonymous tips were useful for getting attention, but HR directors needed documentation to take action. My phone buzzed with another text from Jennifer. "Going to be very late. Big presentation tomorrow." I looked at the GPS tracker on my computer screen. Evan's car was still at the Marriott. I typed back, "Good luck with the presentation. I'm sure you and Evan will do great." The response came back immediately. "How did you know Evan was involved?" "You mentioned it last week," I lied smoothly. "Said he was helping with the strategic planning presentation." "Right, I forgot. See you tomorrow." But I could tell from the delay in her response that I'd rattled her. She was starting to wonder how much I knew, starting to question whether her secret was as safe as she thought. Good. Paranoia was a powerful weapon, and I intended to use it ruthlessly. I closed the laptop and went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, really, since Jennifer spent most nights either at the hotel or on the couch, claiming she didn't want to wake me when she came home late. The room still smelled like her perfume, still contained all the physical evidence of our shared life, photos from vacations, books she'd been reading, jewelry I'd given her for anniversaries and birthdays. All of it felt like artifacts from an archaeological dig, remnants of a civilization that no longer existed. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere across town, my wife was in bed with another man, planning a future that involved discarding me like an outdated piece of software. They thought they were so clever, so careful, so untouchable. They had no idea that their perfect plan was about to become their perfect nightmare. Tomorrow, the real fun would begin. The presentation that Jennifer had been working on so diligently turned out to be more important than I'd initially realized. Through my network of contacts, I learned that it was part of Pinnacle's bid for a massive government contract, the kind of deal that could transform the company from a regional player into a national powerhouse. The presentation was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, with representatives from 3 different federal agencies in attendance. Jennifer and Evan were the lead presenters, which meant their professional reputations were about to be put under a very public microscope. I decided it was time to turn up the heat. On Wednesday morning, I sent another anonymous email to HR, this time with more specific details. Following up on my previous communication regarding VP Jennifer Cross and her subordinate Evan Martinez. I've observed them together at the Marriott downtown on multiple occasions, including last Tuesday evening when they were seen entering and leaving the hotel together. Given that Ms. Cross is married and Mr. Martinez reports directly to her, this appears to constitute a clear violation of company policy regarding workplace relationships and potential harassment. I'm particularly concerned about the timing, given the important government contract presentation scheduled for tomorrow. Our federal partners take ethics violations very seriously, and this situation could jeopardize the entire deal if it becomes public. This time, I included specific dates and locations, giving HR enough concrete information to launch a formal investigation. I also made sure to mention the government contract, knowing that would escalate the urgency of the situation. But the email was just the opening move. The real masterstroke was what I'd planned for the presentation itself. I'd discovered that the government representatives attending the presentation included someone I knew professionally, Dr. Amanda Foster, a former colleague from my days in the defense contracting world. Amanda was now a senior procurement officer with the Department of Defense, and she had a reputation for thoroughness that bordered on obsession. I called her office and managed to get through to her assistant. Dr. Foster, this is Nathan Cross. We worked together on the Meridian project about 5 years ago. Nathan, what a pleasant surprise. How are you? I'm well, thanks. Listen, I heard through the Grapper Pavine that you're evaluating bids from some local tech companies. I wanted to give you a heads up about something that might be relevant to your decision-making process. Oh? What kind of heads up? There are some rumors circulating about ethical issues at one of the companies you're considering. Nothing confirmed, but given the government's standards for contractor integrity, I thought you should be aware. Which company? Pinnacle Tech Solutions. I've heard there might be some inappropriate relationships between executives and subordinates, potential misuse of company resources, that sort of thing. Again, just rumors, but worth investigating. Thanks for the tip, Nathan. We take these things very seriously. I figured you would. Good luck with the evaluation process. I hung up, feeling satisfied. Amanda would now be watching Jennifer and Evan with extra scrutiny during the presentation, looking for any signs of unprofessional behavior or ethical lapses. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, I drove to Pinnacle's building and waited in the parking garage. The GPS tracker showed that Evan was still inside, probably doing last-minute preparation for the presentation. At 9:30, he finally emerged, looking stressed and exhausted. I followed him at a distance as he drove to his apartment complex, a trendy development in the arts district that catered to young professionals with more money than sense. I watched him park and go inside. Then I got to work. I'd brought a small toolkit with me, including a device I'd ordered online that could interfere with electronic signals. It was perfectly legal, marketed as a way to test wireless security systems. But it had some interesting side effects when used creatively. I placed the device near Evan's apartment building's main electrical panel and activated it. Within minutes, the building's wireless internet went down, along with most of the cellular coverage in the immediate area. Evan would spend the night unable to access his email, unable to download the latest version of the presentation files, unable to communicate with Jennifer or anyone else on the team. He'd show up to the most important presentation of his career feeling unprepared and disconnected. Meanwhile, I drove to Jennifer's office building. Security was lighter at night, and I knew the building well enough to avoid the cameras. I made my way to the 15th floor, where Jennifer's department was located. Her office door was locked, but I still had a key card from my days as an unofficial IT consultant for the company. Jennifer had gotten it for me years ago, so I could help with after-hours technical issues, and apparently no one had ever bothered to deactivate it. I slipped into her office and went straight to her computer. It was password protected, but I knew all of Jennifer's passwords. She'd never changed them in 20 years of marriage. Once I had access to her files, I made a series of subtle but devastating changes to the presentation. Nothing obvious, nothing that would be immediately noticeable, but enough to create problems during the actual presentation. I changed some of the financial projections by small amounts, not enough to be obviously wrong, but enough to create inconsistencies between different slides. I altered a few technical specifications in ways that would raise questions from knowledgeable evaluators. I introduced tiny formatting errors that would make the presentation look sloppy and unprofessional. Most importantly, I accessed the shared folder where the presentation was stored and made sure that Evan's version wouldn't sync properly with Jennifer's. They'd show up thinking they were presenting the same material, only to discover during the actual presentation that their slides didn't match. It was sabotage at its most elegant, subtle, untraceable, and absolutely devastating. I finished my work and slipped out of the building, leaving no trace of my presence. By tomorrow afternoon, Jennifer and Evan would be standing in front of some of the most important people in their professional lives, trying to explain why their presentation was full of errors and inconsistencies. But the real beauty of the plan was that they'd blame each other. Under pressure, facing professional humiliation, they'd turn on each other instead of working together. The stress would crack their relationship wide open, exposing all the underlying tensions and resentments. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I positioned myself at a coffee shop across from Pinnacle's building, watching through binoculars as the government representatives arrived for the presentation. Dr. Foster was easy to spot, a tall, severe-looking woman in her 50s who moved with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to wielding authority. She was accompanied by two other officials, both carrying briefcases and wearing the kind of serious expressions that didn't bode well for anyone hoping to impress them. At 2 o'clock, I called Manny's cell phone. "How's it going up there?" I asked. "Not good," he replied quietly. "There's been a lot of activity on 15. People running around, raised voices, that kind of thing. Your wife looked pretty stressed when she came through the lobby earlier." "What about Evan?" "He showed up late. Looked like he hadn't slept. Been up in HR twice already today." Perfect. The pressure was building exactly as I'd planned. At 4:30, my phone rang. It was Jennifer. "Nathan, I need to talk to you." Her voice was strained, almost breaking. I'd never heard her sound so defeated. "What's wrong?" "The presentation. It was a disaster. Complete disaster. The slides were wrong, the numbers didn't match, everything fell apart." "I'm sorry to hear that. What happened?" "I don't know. Someone sabotaged us. The files were corrupted, the data was wrong. It was like someone went through everything and changed just enough to make us look incompetent." "That's terrible. Do you have any idea who would do something like that?" There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Nathan, do you know about Evan and me?" The question hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the moment when all the careful planning and patient execution would pay off. "Yes," I said simply. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." Another pause. I could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. Are you the one who's been destroying your career, ruining your reputation, making your life miserable?" I let the questions hang for a moment before continuing. "What do you think, Jennifer?" "Oh, God. Nathan, please, we need to talk. I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can. You always were good with explanations. Please, come home. Let me try to fix this." "Fix this?" "Jennifer, you spent 8 months planning to divorce me and take half of everything I've worked for. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and treating me like I'm too stupid to notice. What exactly do you think you can fix?" I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No," I said, cutting her off. "We can't, because this isn't over. This is just the beginning." I hung up and turned off my phone. Across town, my wife was probably sitting in her ruined office, surrounded by the wreckage of her career and her marriage, finally understanding that she'd underestimated the wrong man. But I wasn't done with her yet. Not by a long shot. The final phase of my plan was about to begin, and it was going to be spectacular. Friday morning brought news that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Manny called at 7 a.m. with an update that made me smile for the first time in weeks. "They're cleaning out offices on 15, he said. HR lady came in early with a couple of security guards. Your wife and that Martinez kid are both being escorted out of the building." "Terminated?" "Looks like it. Martinez left carrying a cardboard box, and your wife, well, she looked like someone had run over her cat." I thanked Manny and hung up, feeling a surge of satisfaction. The presentation disaster had been the final straw for Pinnacle's executives. Faced with the prospect of losing a multi-million-dollar government contract due to their employees' unprofessional behavior, they'd done what any sensible company would do. They'd cut their losses. But I wasn't ready to celebrate yet. Jennifer and Evan were down, but they weren't out. People like them had a way of landing on their feet, finding new opportunities, rebuilding their lives. I needed to make sure that wasn't going to happen. I drove to the boxing gym and found Dino working with a young heavyweight who had dreams of turning professional. I waited until they finished their session, then pulled my friend aside. "I need a favor," I said. "Name it." "I need you to make some phone calls. You know people in the business community. people who talk to other people. I need word to get around that Jennifer Cross and Evan Martinez are bad news. Unprofessional, untrustworthy, not worth the risk. Dino studied my face carefully. You want to blackball them. I want to make sure they understand there are consequences for their actions. That's a dangerous game, Nate. These kinds of campaigns can backfire. Not if they're done right, and not if the information is true. What information? I pulled out my phone and showed him some of the evidence I'd gathered. Photos of Jennifer and Evan together, documentation of their misuse of company resources, records of their hotel meetings. They violated company policy, abused their positions, and cost their employer a major contract. That's not slander. That's just facts. Dino nodded slowly. I'll make some calls. But this makes us even. Understand? After this, you're on your own. Understood. I left the gym and drove to my office, where I spent the morning implementing the next phase of my plan. Using my network of contacts in the tech industry, I began a systematic campaign to destroy Jennifer and Evan's professional reputations. A call to a headhunter I'd worked with. Just wanted to give you a heads up about a couple of people who might be coming on the market. Jennifer Cross and Evan Martinez from Pinnacle. I'd be careful with them. I've heard some troubling things about their professional conduct. An email to a former colleague who now ran HR for a major consulting firm. Thought you should know that Pinnacle just terminated 2 executives for ethics violations. Might want to flag their names in your system in case they apply for positions. A casual mention to a vendor about hearing some interesting stories about the quality of work coming out of Pinnacle's strategic development team before they cleaned house. Each contact led to more contacts. Each conversation spawned additional conversations. Within hours, word was spreading through the professional network like wildfire. Jennifer Cross and Evan Martinez were damaged goods. Too risky to hire, too problematic to trust. But the real masterstroke was yet to come. I'd discovered that Evan had been working on a side project, a startup company he'd been planning to launch with some friends from business school. The company was still in the early stages, but they'd already filed incorporation papers and begun seeking investors. I did some research and found that one of Evan's potential investors was a venture capital firm run by someone I knew well, Marcus Chen, a former client who'd made a fortune in software development before moving into investing. I called Marcus and arranged to meet him for lunch. "Nathan, good to see you," he said as we sat down at an upscale restaurant downtown. "How's the consulting business?" "Can't complain." "Listen, Marcus, I wanted to talk to you about something. I heard you might be looking at investing in a startup run by a guy named Evan Martinez." Marcus nodded. "Interesting kid. Young, ambitious, some good ideas about market penetration strategies. Why?" "Just wanted to give you some background information that might be relevant to your decision." I told him about Evan's relationship with Jennifer, the ethics violations, the termination from Pinnacle. I showed him some of the evidence I'd gathered, painting a picture of a young man with poor judgment and questionable ethics. "This is the kind of person you want to bet your money on?" I asked. Marcus studied the documents I'd provided, his expression growing more serious with each page. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," he said finally. "We do extensive due diligence on all our potential investments, but personal conduct issues like this can be hard to uncover. Just looking out for a friend. And I appreciate it. This definitely changes my perspective on Mr. Martinez." I left the lunch meeting knowing that Evan's startup dreams had just evaporated. Without Marcus's investment, the company would never get off the ground. Another door closed, another option eliminated. But Jennifer was proving to be more resilient than I'd expected. Through my surveillance network, I learned that she'd already reached out to several former colleagues, trying to leverage old relationships into new opportunities. She was smart, connected, and desperate, a dangerous combination. I needed to cut off her escape routes before she could regroup. That afternoon, I made a series of strategic phone calls to people in Jennifer's professional network. I didn't lie or exaggerate. I simply provided factual information about her recent termination and the circumstances surrounding it. "I thought you should know," I'd say. "Jennifer Cross is going to be looking for new opportunities, and there are some things about her departure from Pinnacle that you might want to be aware of." Each conversation was brief, professional, and devastating. I wasn't asking anyone to blacklist Jennifer. I was simply providing information that any responsible employer would want to have. By the end of the day, Jennifer's professional network had been systematically poisoned. Every potential employer, every former colleague, every possible reference had been given reason to question her judgment and integrity. That evening, I drove home to find Jennifer's car in the driveway. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing the same clothes she'd been fired in, looking like she'd aged 10 years in a single day. "We need to talk," she said as I walked in. "I'm listening." "You've destroyed everything. My career, my reputation, my future. Are you happy now? Happy? No, Jennifer. I'm not happy. I'm satisfied. There's a difference. What do you want from me? What will it take to make this stop? I sat down across from her, studying the woman I'd been married to for 20 years. She looked defeated, broken, stripped of all the confidence and arrogance that had carried her through the affair. I want you to understand what you did to me, I said. I want you to feel what it's like to have your life torn apart by someone you trusted. I want you to experience the humiliation of having your private business become public knowledge. I understand. I get it. But enough is enough. We can get divorced, divide our assets, go our separate ways, but this campaign of destruction has to stop. Does it? Nathan, please, I'm begging you. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I don't deserve this. You don't deserve this? Jennifer, you spent 8 months planning to divorce me and take half of everything I've worked for. You used our joint credit cards to pay for hotel rooms where you could cheat on me. You talked about me like I was some pathetic fool who was too stupid to notice what was happening. What exactly do you think you deserve? She started crying then, real tears, not the manipulative kind she'd used during arguments over the years. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Evan was just... He made me feel young again, important again. You and I, we'd grown apart, and I felt invisible in my own marriage. So you decided to make me invisible in my own life. That wasn't my intention, but that was the result. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 20 years of marriage pressing down on us like a physical force. What happens now? She asked finally. Now? Now you get to find out what it's like to rebuild your life from scratch, just like I had to do when I discovered your affair. And us? There is no us, Jennifer. There hasn't been for a long time. You made sure of that. She nodded, accepting the finality of it. Will you at least stop the campaign? Let me try to salvage something from this mess? I considered her request. The rational part of me knew that I'd already won. Jennifer and Evan had lost their jobs, their reputations, their futures. Continuing the attack would be overkill, but the wounded part of me, the part that had spent months feeling humiliated and betrayed, wasn't ready to show mercy. I'll think about it, I said. It was a lie, and we both knew it. The campaign would continue until I was satisfied that justice had been served, and I was nowhere near satisfied yet. Jennifer stood up slowly, like an old woman, despite being only 39. I'll be staying at my sister's, she said. I'll send someone for my things. That's probably best. She walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, Nathan, I did love you once. Maybe I still do, in some twisted way. If this is how you show love, Jennifer, I'm glad you're leaving. She left without another word, and I was alone in the house that had once been our home. I should have felt victorious, but instead I felt empty. Revenge was supposed to be satisfying, but all I felt was the hollow ache of a life that had been irreparably broken. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more move to make, one final gambit that would ensure Jennifer and Evan never forgot the price of betraying me. And this time, I was going to make it personal. 6 months later, I stood on the roof of Pinnacle's building, looking down at the city spread out below me like a circuit board. The night was clear and cold, with stars visible despite the urban light pollution. It was the kind of night that made you believe in possibilities, in fresh starts, in the chance to rebuild what had been torn down. But I wasn't here for inspiration. I was here for closure. The building was empty except for the security guards, and I'd made sure Manny was working the night shift. Getting access to the roof had been simple, a matter of knowing which doors were monitored and which weren't, which cameras had blind spots and which didn't. Jennifer and Evan were waiting for me when I emerged from the stairwell. They looked older, worn down by the months of professional exile and personal recrimination. Jennifer had lost weight, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Evan looked like a man who'd aged a decade in half a year. You came, Jennifer said, her voice barely carrying over the wind. You sounded desperate on the phone. I was curious. We need this to end, Nathan. We need you to call off whatever network you've built to destroy us. I walked to the edge of the roof and looked down at the street 40 floors below. The city looked peaceful from this height, all the chaos and conflict reduced to tiny points of light moving in orderly patterns. Why should I? Because you've won, Evan said, speaking for the first time. We've lost everything. Our jobs, our reputations, our futures. Isn't that enough? I turned to study him. The cocky young executive was gone, replaced by a broken man who flinched when I looked at him directly. You cost me 20 years of my life, I said. 20 years of believing in something that was a lie. You think 6 months of unemployment makes us even? What do you want? Jennifer asked. Money? I'll give you everything in the divorce. The house, the investments, all of it. I don't want your money. Then what? I pulled out my phone and showed them a video I'd recorded earlier that day. It was security footage from the Marriott showing them entering and leaving the hotel together on multiple occasions. The timestamps and dates were clearly visible. I want you to post this on your social media accounts, I said, both of you, with a full confession about your affair and how it cost your company a major government contract. I want you to take responsibility for what you did, publicly and permanently. They stared at the phone in horror. That would destroy what's left of our reputations, Evan said. That's the point. Nathan, please, Jennifer begged. We have families, people who depend on us. My parents, Evan's sister, they don't deserve to be humiliated because of our mistakes. Neither did I. The wind picked up, sending papers and debris swirling around the rooftop. In the distance, I could hear sirens, police, ambulance, or fire department, racing to deal with someone else's crisis. If we do this, Jennifer said finally, will it be over? Will you leave us alone? I considered the question. The rational part of me knew that public humiliation would be the perfect ending to my campaign. It would satisfy my need for justice while ensuring that Jennifer and Evan never forgot the consequences of their actions. But the wounded part of me, the part that had been betrayed and discarded, wanted more. It wanted them to suffer as I had suffered, to feel as helpless and humiliated as I had felt. I'll think about it, I said. Jennifer's face crumpled. That's what you said 6 months ago. And look how much you've learned since then. Evan stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually try to fight me, but then he seemed to remember where we were, how far it was to the street below, and how little he had left to lose. You're a monster, he said quietly. No, I replied. I'm just a man who learned not to let people walk all over him. I turned and walked back toward the stairwell, leaving them standing at the edge of the roof with their ultimatum and their desperation. Nathan, wait, Jennifer called after me. I paused at the door but didn't turn around. I really did love you once, she said. Before everything went wrong, before I became someone I didn't recognize, I loved you. That has to count for something. It did count for something, I said. It counted for 20 years, but you threw that away for 6 months with him. I opened the door and stepped into the stairwell, leaving them alone on the roof with their choices and their consequences. As I walked down the 40 flights of stairs, I thought about what came next. Jennifer and Evan would probably refuse to post the confession, which meant the campaign would continue. Their professional exile would become permanent, their personal lives would remain in ruins, and they would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, wondering what I might do next. Or they would swallow their pride, post the confession, and hope I would keep my word about ending the war between us. Either way, they would never again underestimate the man they had betrayed. I reached the ground floor and nodded to Manny as I walked through the lobby. Everything okay, Mr. Cross? He asked. Everything's perfect, I said. And for the first time in a very long time, I meant it. The glass office had shattered completely, taking down everyone inside it. But from the wreckage, I had built something new. Not a marriage, not a relationship, but a kind of justice that felt as solid as bedrock. I walked out into the night, leaving my enemies to contemplate their choices from 40 floors above the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, free, victorious, and finally, completely alone. The war was over. I had won. And that was enough.